today's video, we're getting ready for fall by making two mosaic pumpkins. One round, one flat. One grouted, one not? I'll explain. Both are adorable, easy to make, and perfect for your fall decor. Let's get to it. Welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Julie. And on this channel, we talk about tips, tricks, tools, adhesives, materials, and specific mosaic projects, all to shorten your learning curve when it comes to creating mosaic art. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please consider subscribing. It's pumpkin season, or getting close to it. I've had a couple pumpkin substrates my son and I bought over the years, and we never really did anything with them, and now that he's older and not really interested, I thought, what would be better than having a mosaic pumpkin? Everything's better with mosaic, am I right? So let's talk about the specifics of the items I'm using today and the shared items between the two pumpkins. I'll talk about the substrates for each. They're both easy to find and inexpensive later in the video as I'm discussing each project individually. And just to give you a little taste of the pumpkins, pun intended, one of them is double-sided. So one side is a pumpkin for fall, Thanksgiving, and the other side is going to be a jack-o'-lantern for Halloween. So you simply have it on your tabletop and you turn depending on the season. So moving on, let's talk about the things that both of the pumpkins have in common, such as the materials, the tools, and the adhesive. To give you a little background on how these pumpkins will be used, which we know because I did a previous video on what you need to consider when you're starting a mosaic project, we need to know and think about how will these pumpkins be used. And in this case, both of these pumpkins will be in the same room on different coffee tables. So I wanted some sort of similarity between the two pieces. An easy way to achieve this is by using a similar color palette. And in the case of today's pumpkins, they're using the same exact materials. The materials for both pumpkins today use a wide range of oranges, darks, mediums, lights. There's even a few iridescent shades. I use 3 oranges in stained glass, 9 in vitreous glass, 3 in glass tile, and 3 in smalty. The stems have 4 different shades of green vitreous. I pulled materials from inventory to cover both pumpkins, and I just used what I had. Once I pulled the material from inventory, I got started with cutting things down. In a project like this, where they're both using the same materials, I like to get all of my cutting done ahead of time so that then I can really get into a tiling groove. Each piece of glass that I cut was no longer than 1 inch and no wider than 3/8 of an inch. Regarding getting started with a what I'll call standardized size really depended on the round pumpkin. I needed to decide on a width and length of the pieces that would work with the round pumpkin. I didn't want the pieces too large since it was a round substrate. That wasn't an issue with the flat pumpkin. Once I decided on a width and a length I liked, I then used that piece as my guide or pattern when cutting all the other pieces of glass. You can hold up your piece of glass to the glass you want to cut and then cut, or you can mark it up using a permanent marker. Personally, I find that marking up the glass and then using that guide to either anchor my glass cutter on or my wheeled glass nippers on, I find that that just works easier than trying to bobble 2 pieces of glass. The cutting tools I used for this project are, as I just mentioned, the wheeled glass nippers, a glass cutter, and running pliers. I also used a glass grinder, or you can use a sanding stone to take off any rough edges. I've done a few videos on this channel about how to use those tools, including how to cut stained glass, and I'll put a link down below in the description so you can check them out. The adhesive for both projects is thin set, You will see though, once we get to the round pumpkin, that I started off with a different adhesive, but about 4 pieces in I realized it wasn't going to work and scrapped that, but we'll talk a little more about that later in the video. As for the grout, well, I did something a little different this time, and I let my Instagram followers decide if these pieces were going to be grouted or not. It's a little unconventional, and I gotta say, it was a lot of fun letting them decide. And I fully 100% agree with their decision and have gone along with it. So you'll learn as we talk about the individual projects if people voted for grout or no grout. We'll start with the round pumpkin and I'll take you through the project, and then we'll move on to the double-sided flat pumpkin. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. So let's address the elephant in the room. Or maybe I'm the only one that thinks there's an elephant in the room. And that's because the substrate of the round pumpkin is not a substrate I would recommend. Don't get me wrong, it worked just fine, but it's not a great material for mosaics. I was kind of taking a risk, and isn't that what art really is all about? So the substrate for the round pumpkin is a carvable pumpkin. Yep, it's a plastic carvable pumpkin. I'm sure you've seen these in arts and crafts stores during the Halloween season. These pumpkins are made from plastic, as I mentioned, and had I been making this for anyone other than myself, I would have picked a better material. Something like solid wood or cement, even a glass pumpkin would be better than the plastic. But as I said, I already had it, and so what's the risk? It was for me, and I just really wanted to see if it would work. And I'm happy to report it did great. I should note that the plastic of this particular pumpkin is a hard plastic. I've seen some that are a little more mushy, easy to dent, but this is a hard plastic pumpkin. We already talked about the materials and colors, but I wanted to talk a little more in depth about the adhesive. So initially, I tried this vinyl fabric and plastic glue by Loctite, and it worked great. It's a fast dryer, so my pieces stayed put, didn't slide down, and everything was wonderful. But there's always a but. I was dealing with different thicknesses of material and wanted them to be closer in height on the surface level, which meant I needed to build up the adhesive behind some of the thinner pieces. So I pulled the pieces off and decided to go with thinset instead. Thinset gives me the flexibility to build up the pieces, the thinner pieces, because it's a little stiffer than the Loctite glue. The Loctite glue wasn't giving me enough stiffness to achieve this. If you do decide to try out a carvable pumpkin, and your pieces aren't too big or heavy, I think the Loctite glue will work just fine for you as long as you're dealing with a hard plastic carvable pumpkin. I started tiling up at the top of the pumpkin near the stem and had decided on my pattern beforehand, which was straight lines. I tiled down the pumpkin to a certain point, stopped, and then started tiling a new row. I was able to keep the pumpkin from rolling by resting it between 2 pairs of pliers. I was able to tile half the pumpkin, not including the bottom, in one tiling session. So I let that dry overnight, and then the next day, I tiled the other half of the pumpkin and the bottom. I rested it, stem side down, for a few hours and then went back and tiled the stem. This is a relatively quick pumpkin to make because all of the glass cutting was done beforehand, with the exception of a few cuts here and there. So I was really able to get in a great tiling groove. And as I mentioned, I allowed my Instagram followers to decide if this was going to be grouted or not, and the results were overwhelming. So you won't be seeing a round grouted mosaic pumpkin here. No grout was the clear winner. Should your mosaic pumpkin require grouting, you don't have to do anything special because it's a round object. If you would like some instruction on how to mix up small batches of grout, or just to see how I have grouted a round substrate, I'll put links in the description down below so you can check them out. And there you have it, a round mosaic ungrouted pumpkin ready for fall. I'll include links down below for all of the tools I've used, as well as substrate and glass options in case you'd like to create a pumpkin of your own. And now let's get to the flat pumpkin that is double-sided or reversible. We already talked about the specifics of the tools, materials, and adhesives, but I do want to talk a little about the substrate and what it's made of. It's wood, 3/4 inch thick, which is pretty substantial, and can stand up on its own on a table, a desk, or a shelf. And then I'm going to be adding mosaic to both sides, which is adding weight to it. So it's going to be a pretty substantial pumpkin for being so small. And of course, when working with wood in mosaic, I needed to prep the surface, both sides, before I started. So I did that the day before I was ready to start tiling. If you'd like to see how to prep wood for mosaics, I'll put a link down in the description so you can check it out. So we need to talk a little bit about how this pumpkin is going to be used. And my thinking is I wanted one side to be for fall and Thanksgiving, and I wanted the other side to be the jack-o'-lantern face, which is the wood cutout. So the substrate is wood with a cutout jack-o'-lantern face. I'll use the face as my guide or pattern, but I'm covering it up with black stained glass. It's actually a bit of a problem, so to speak. So what I did was I used the cutout face in the wood as my guide and cut out black stained glass in about the same size pattern as what's there. I did change the mouth a little bit. I filled the openings of the substrate with thin set mortar before I tiled the jack-o'-lantern face, and wanted it to be at the same level as the surrounding tile of the mosaic. The black stained glass pieces that I cut are just slightly larger in spots than the wood openings, and I didn't feel like the overlap was enough to keep them from falling down into the openings. So I'm working on wax paper, which will allow me to pull the mosaic off the table should the thin set make it down to the other side. I started on the jack-o'-lantern face to give it time to dry a bit before I started the mosaic on that side. And this is only because I filled the openings behind it. One way around this would be to tile on mesh. Then the pieces wouldn't fall through the openings. However, I'm only painting the edge of this pumpkin, not adding mosaic. So I didn't want to bulk up one side of the pumpkin, which is what mesh would have done. So I flipped the pumpkin back over and started tiling the pumpkin side. I used the same design as I did with the round pumpkin, which is simple lines of glass. This went rather quickly. Then I flipped the piece over and started tiling on the jack-o'-lantern side. I wanted a different tiling pattern for this side instead of the straight, simple lines. So I took all of my leftover material and cut them down into random shapes. Remember, smaller tessera take longer to tile, so this side took considerably longer than the pumpkin side. Once I was done tiling the face, I started on the stems for both sides. And then I let it dry overnight. And once again, for the grouting, I allowed my Instagram followers to decide if I'm going to grout or not. I gave them the option. One side could be grouted, the other side not. It was pretty overwhelming that the grout vote was the majority. Allowing my Instagram followers to decide was really fun because it allowed me to hear some other perspectives, as well as I just couldn't make up my mind. So the majority voted, and unlike the round pumpkin, they voted for me to grout, which I find so interesting because it's the same materials, but it's a different substrate. It's a different shape. And it's just interesting how the same materials can translate and give a different feel depending on the substrate. I love mosaics, so I grouted both sides. Then I finished off the raw edge by painting it. I'll include a list down below of all of the tools I used on this project, as well as substrate ideas and glass options in case you'd like to create a double-sided tabletop pumpkin. Question of the day, let me know in the comments if you've created any Halloween mosaics, and if so, what? I love Halloween mosaics, and I'd love to hear what you've created. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up as it really does help my channel, and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell notification so you never miss a single upload, and let me know in the comments if there's something you'd like me to cover in a future video. I'll see you soon. Bye. I've had a pumpkin, but I said again. Oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, seriously. Seriously. Carvable pumpkin. It's covered in thin set. You've covered in cement, basically. So, yeah, okay, it could be a weapon, sure. I see where you're going with that, but it's pretty strong. And then this little guy, oh my goodness. Y'all are gonna think you tuned into, I don't know. If you're looking for more mosaic inspiration, you can check out one of these two videos. Until then, see ya. And we're done. We're done.